I'll share my screen. So I may speed through some of these slides just in the interest of time, so that people can ask questions. So we've all heard about the infrastructure bill that is currently in the House of Representatives. It started off in the House of Representatives. They put in their provisions. It went to the Senate. The Senate made some changes. They made some significant changes, actually. And then, so it had to go back to the House for them to approve the changes made by the Senate. Once it passes the House, then it'll go to President Biden to be signed if the House doesn't make any more significant changes. So that's what we're going to talk about today, but I have to give my disclosure. This presentation does not constitute legal advice, and it does not create an attorney-client relationship with me. It also only represents my views and not that of any other organization or office which I may be affiliated. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to discuss all of these. These are the trucking related provisions in the infrastructure bill as of today. In the middle, you can see no motor carrier insurance increase. That's not in the bill. They did not increase motor carriers insurance. They also didn't provide any funding for truck parking, which is a big problem for truckers today. The most pertinent part of this whole slide is the last line, the dispatcher oversight provision, and that is what the bulk of what I'm going to talk about will be centered on. Okay, so on the left side of the screen, you can see a picture of the actual bill. Of course, you can't read it. So I copied and pasted the text on the right side of the screen, and I highlighted in yellow the pertinent parts of the dispatcher provision. So I'm just going to read. Not later than 1 year after the date of enactment of this act. So once they pass this bill, the Department of Transportation will have 1 year to do the following. The Secretary shall issue guidance to clarify the definitions of the terms broker and bona fide agent. If you skip down to C, the second highlighted portion, in issuing the guidance that's referenced in A, the Secretary shall add a minimum. 1, examine the role of a dispatch service in the transportation industry. 2, examine the extent to which dispatch services could be considered brokers or bona fide agents. And 3, clarify the level of financial penalties for unauthorized brokerage activities. So I guess the next question would be, why would they even have this in the infrastructure bill in the first place? So last year, a group called TIA, the Transportation Intermediaries Association, they represent freight brokers. They filed a petition with the Department of Transportation asking for them to give the same things that are in the bill, right? Asking for them to define what a dispatch service is, whether a dispatch service can be considered a bona fide agent, and whether folks operating in the dispatching service space are operating legally under the existing guidelines. And they wanted them to issue guidelines where there weren't any. So then came this year, the infrastructure bill. So one of the things that TIA does a few things, right, for its freight brokers. They file petitions, obviously, with the Department of Transportation. They write what are called amicus briefs. And when there's like a major important case that involves a freight broker, and they want the court to side with the freight broker, they'll write a brief in the case that'll try to persuade the court to side in the favor of freight brokers. And another thing they do is they lobby Congress. And that is what I think is how this language got into the infrastructure bill. Because if you think about it, why would members of Congress just be thinking about dispatching services? They probably just wouldn't be sitting around thinking about that. So we're going to talk about the requirements to be a bona fide agent and how to legally operate as a dispatcher and other bodies of law that apply to dispatching. So this slide just shows what the definition of a bona fide agent is. There's a citation at the bottom. If you want to take a picture of the slide, you can. If you type in that citation into Google, this definition will come up. So the United States Department of Transportation lays out two types of people besides a freight broker that can arrange the movement of freight on behalf of a motor carrier. That is an employee and a bona fide agent. And because the way that dispatching services are structured now as LLCs or business entities, they're not an employee, obviously. So they would have to be classified under bona fide agent. So a bona fide agent, by definition, and this is the DOT's definition, is a person who is part of a normal organization of a motor carrier and performs duties under the carrier's direction pursuant to a pre-existing agreement that provides for a continuing relationship, precluding the exercise of discretion on the part of the agent in allocating traffic between the carrier and others. Now that's a whole lot of words, right? So what I did was I broke it down into 4 requirements. The first 3 requirements come from the definition that we just looked at. The last requirement comes from a supplemental guidance that was issued by the Department of Transportation in 2012. The citation for that is that small text that you see at the bottom of the slide. You want to take a picture of the slide so you can go and Google that. It comes up on Google as a PDF. You can read it, gives you a lot of good guidance and tips. So to be a bona fide agent, you need to demonstrate 4 things. 1, you must perform your duties at the direction of the motor carrier. The motor carrier is in charge. If you're acting as someone's agent, the person who you're acting on behalf of, that person is in charge. Number 2, you must have a pre-existing agreement that provides for a continuing relationship. So you have to have a contract, and you have to have that contract in place before you do any work. Otherwise, it won't be a pre-existing agreement. The contract not only has to be in place, but it has to demonstrate that you plan to work with this carrier over a significant period of time. That's the continuing relationship piece. There are ways that you can get out of a contract, even though the contract is meant to have some longevity, but we can discuss that later. The third thing is the motor carrier must have access to the broker and shipper to which the load is associated without limitation by the agent. Now, what you could add to that is if he wants it. So if the motor carrier doesn't want access to the broker or shipper, then that's fine. Then you can just act as their agent, their intermediary. But at the point where the motor carrier wants that access, as the agent, you have to give them that access. All right, so this is the last slide. The U.S. Department of Transportation regulates, it defines who can arrange the movement of freight. So this slide is just all the bodies of law. Well, it's not really all. There's another one that I didn't include, but we're not going to talk about that. The Department of Transportation defines who can arrange the movement of freight and what is a bona fide agent. We already talked about that. Another body of law is the law of agency, and it defines the rights and duties an agent has to a motor carrier. As when you act as someone's agent, you have a duty to act in their best interest. You have a duty to act. You have to have a duty of confidentiality to them. You have a duty of loyalty to them. And where that duty of loyalty conflicts with your work, you have a duty to disclose to them. So here's just a brief example. So let's say Lotta is a singer and she wants me to be her agent. So I have a duty to Lotta. If I want to go work and be Beyonce's agent, I have a duty to Lotta to say, hey, Lotta, Beyonce wants me to be her agent. Is that okay with you? Because in actuality, Lotta and Beyonce are both going to put out music. They may have music out at the same time, and they're going to be competing. So my duty of loyalty is first to Lotta. And if she allows me to work with Beyonce, then that's fine. So that's kind of how that agent relationship works. And there's a lot to it, but I'm going to move on. So then you have contract law. So obviously I said before that you have to have a contract in place, and contracts, they define, contract law defines what is a valid contract and what clauses a dispatcher could include to protect themselves. So most people think of a contract as just like maybe putting a relationship on paper, like we talked about a little bit before, or putting a transaction on paper. Well, a contract could be something that you have in place to protect yourself. In this case, in a dispatching case, it would protect you by demonstrating that you're acting as a bona fide agent, or it will protect you if a lawsuit were to arise, if you have the appropriate clauses in the contract that would absolve you of liability. Now, of course, a contract can absolve you of liability for somebody who's not a party to the contract, which we can talk about later if you want. But as far as the motor carrier dispatcher relationship, a contract could absolve you of liability if you have the appropriate clause. I'm going to finish these last two bodies of law and then move on to questions. So we talked about lawsuits just briefly. So the law of torts, that's pretty much just lawsuits, accidents. It defines how a dispatcher can be liable for his actions. One thing about transportation is that there is a high risk of litigation. There's a whole lot of trucks on the road every single day. In the state of Georgia alone, there's one truck accident a day, and that's only in one state. So anytime there's an accident, there's a risk of being sued. And there are occasions where dispatchers are sued. And there are cases where dispatchers are held liable. So that brings us to business law. Business law defines how a transportation business should be structured and what protections these business structures provide. So that is it. This slide has how you can contact me, how you can reach me. I'm gonna leave this up, but just turn it over to Lotta and open up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. If we could, and we'll share this information here in the group right here, but of course, if you want to take, a snapshot of it, but I would like for us to actually go back one slide, if we can leave that slide open, because I think that's going to be kind of the basis of a lot of these questions here. I know the questions that I've collected, this is the slide. So okay. I am going to go ahead and open up the mic. If you would like to ask your question, directly to Ashley, or you can put your question here in the chat, but we're going to go ahead and have it open for Q&A.
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
The question was about the contract. So are you talking about as far as being a dispatcher, you should have a contract between yourself and the broker And you should also have a contract between yourself and the carrier. Is that correct?
So when I'm referencing contract, I'm talking about your contract with the motor carrier. Okay. I'm not referencing your contract with the freight broker.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Anyone else had an immediate question? And then I've got 3 here. And I know, as I said in the chat, I've kind of been chiming in the chat as well. This is being recorded. So everyone that's registered will get a copy of this entire Zoom. This is also going to be on YouTube. So you can share and, share this information as well. If you are interested in getting into more of this information, and reviewing it and having a chance to follow up with Ashley, I did share a copy of her book, The Art of Commercial Trucking, Truck Dispatching. It's available on Amazon, so you can check that out as well. If there weren't any questions, so here is the first question that was kind of asked. And again, I wanted this slide to be up to hopefully better help explain it and make sure it's, kind of shared that way. But when people are saying a dispatcher is operating illegally, what are the triggers that they're usually referring to? So when someone says, dispatching is an illegal thing or something of that nature, what usually are they referring to?
Okay, so I need to back up to what we talked about even before this slide. So the Department of Transportation lays out who can arrange the movement of freight. The freight brokers, motor carriers, freight forwarders, the shipper, but it's their goods, right? Employees of a motor carrier, and then a bona fide agent. There is no definition of dispatcher. There's no area in the law that says that a dispatcher is authorized to move freight. So the idea is that, and this is the position that the Freight Brokers Association has pushed, is that a dispatcher must be operating illegally because they're not within the language of the law. There's nothing that says that dispatching is legal, but there's also nothing that says dispatching is illegal. However, as a practical matter, you want to operate within whatever guidance is already there. So there's already a definition of bona fide agent. So it's my view, and it's my view that if you're not operating as a bona fide agent, then you probably can be deemed as operating illegally. Does that make sense?
It does. And if I can rephrase it for clarity. So because the words dispatcher are not clearly defined by FMCSA and other areas of transportation law, there really isn't a role assigned with it because, again, the name dispatcher isn't like standing out. What is standing out that's very akin to dispatcher duties to what we're calling it is the role of a bona fide agent. So we would be better protected calling ourselves bona fide agents so we can follow the model and the rule of law to protect ourselves in our operations. Would that be clear, or did I miss something? Okay.
Right.
All right. So again, it gets down, you guys, and this is kind of how it is with insurance and just really just law overall. It's a matter of words. The words are not put in there carelessly. They're actually very purposed, and you have to make sure to which context those words are being used, because like in insurance, when I say carrier, a lot of times I'm talking about the insurance company, but I have to kind of switch it on and off because when I'm talking to my client who is a motor carrier, they're the trucking company. So I have to always make sure I'm, breaking down when we see the word written in an insurance policy, what carrier means as far, because then they use the word insured versus carrier in the policy. So Tracy, did you want to ask your question from chat, or did you want me to read it aloud? TD? I'm going to read it aloud unless she pops on. So she has a question. She says she has an agreement or contract. What would be the clause that should definitely be contained in that contract that would hold dispatchers harmless in the event of accidents?
Okay, so the name of the clause is an indemnification clause. If you have that in your contract as a dispatcher, it'll protect you from being sued for the negligent acts of the motor carrier himself or the motor carrier's driver. What an indemnification clause will not protect you from is if a third party that's not a party to your contract sues you. So I could just give you like a brief scenario. Let's say you're working with ABC Motor Carrier and they have their driver. The driver, you've dispatched a load to the driver gets into an accident. The injured party, the party that is injured by the driver, they are free to sue you, okay? They are free to sue you. Who cannot sue you would be the motor carrier. So that's the type of clause that will protect you, but it will not protect you from third parties.
And that makes sense. Oh, absolutely. Especially again, when we're talking about insurance, and that is used in insurance language, the indemnification clause, indemnification usually means to basically make whole, to pay back, to, you know, be back on that level field before something had occurred. And so when you talk about accidents, you go into liabilities and, you know, oh, right. It just slipped my mind. Basically, the percentage in which you played into the accident, and each state is different. And I think that's another thing, whole other conversation that makes this even crazier, because each state is different. Each state is different. So make sure that you're first and foremost aware of how your state treats how, you know, just the types of documents and stuff that you would need to operate, and even the states that your clients are coming from. And actually, if you could speak to that, how should that be based? So is a motor carrier's state of maybe their incorporation kind of the state of jurisdiction, or if you're helping them find loads, let's, for this example, say, you know, I'm in Texas, but my carrier is from Louisiana, incorporated in Louisiana, but I want to find loads in Mississippi. So using that example, just to kind of make it, you know, clearer, hopefully, how would that work as far as things I need to be aware of?
So the thing is, if you have a contract in place, you can dictate where you're sued, and you can dictate what state's law will apply. So if you're in Texas and you operate in Texas and you're working with people that are out of state, if your contract with them says you have to sue me in Texas and we're going to apply Texas law, and they sign and they agree to that, then that's where they have to sue you. And that's what law will have to apply. But you have to put that into a contract. Now, if you don't have that clause and something happens, you can be sued in either of those places, Mississippi, Louisiana, or Texas. It just depends on the situation.
Understood. So the name of that clause, would that be what would be the name of the clause? Let me ask it that way.
It's just a jurisdiction or venue or governing law. You can probably Google that and find that. But what I would say is that you should get an attorney to look at your contract. And because the law of contracts and really any body of law is going to be slightly different in each state. So you want to get an attorney that's licensed to practice in the state whose law is going to be governing your contract. So if you say, you have to sue me in Texas and we're going to apply Texas law, you need to get a Texas attorney to look at your contract and let you know how your contract is going to be viewed by the court.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now I hope this makes sense to where copy and paste is the devil's workshop. I mean, it can get you into more harm than good. And it's just really for your own safety. Of course, if you know that document was originated in, Texas, for the example, you can kind of say that there's some things in there, but that's what an attorney's eyes are trained to see. They can see, because of their familiarity with the law of that state, how certain things may be worded even that make it not really aligned to kind of the things that state follows. In closing, and again, I'm opening it up for any additional questions for Ashley, and we thank you so much for your time. What would be a major takeaway you want our audience to have of your presentation?
There are a lot of risks in transportation, but there are also a lot of tools in place to protect yourself. As far as agency law, you can operate within the duties that you have. As far as contracts, you can put in provisions that would absolve you of liability in certain situations. As far as business law, you can structure your company to where you don't suffer any penalty for debts or liabilities of the company. And if I could just take like a couple seconds to talk about business law really quickly, because this is one of the easiest ways to protect your personal assets from liability in case there is a lawsuit or some sort of debt. In my opinion, in transportation, every company needs to either be an LLC or a corporation. And I'll tell you why. So imagine a person standing outside, it's pouring down raining, and they have an umbrella. Well, of course, they're not going to get touched by the rain. That is what an LLC or a corporation does. It shields the owners from liabilities, from debts or lawsuits or anything that could arise. If you form, let's say, a partnership, right? A partnership is like an umbrella. You're holding an umbrella with holes in it, right? So some of the rain is not gonna fall on your head, but a lot of it probably will. So that's what a partnership does. It only allocates who is going to be liable. It distributes the liability amongst the owners after the partnership has paid out of its own assets. If you don't understand that, just contact me afterwards and we can talk more about it. DBA, which has been talked about a lot in our group. A DBA is like, I don't know if you guys have seen those pictures where a person's holding like a umbrella frame, but there's no fabric, right? So that's a DBA. All of the rain is going to fall down on you. So a DBA is just a nickname. It's literally doing business as. So if I'm Ashley Baker and I'm doing business as Ashley's Transportation, if anything happens with Ashley's Transportation, it has happened to me. And it puts my houses, my cars, my bank accounts, all of my assets at risk because there's nothing to protect me. There's no corporate structure or business structure to protect me personally. So you can protect yourself. There are different tools in the law that are built in to protect you. And that's what I would like for you to take away from what I've said.
Great information. And I just wanted to add, and feel free, like I said, this is an open conversation. These are business structures, which means they're not insurance plans. You can't cash out of them. They don't give you certain, and there's ways to compromise that structure. So kind of where I'm going with that is an LLC gives you a separate entity, which means you've separated yourself now from that business. And that's what's giving you the protection. Your business has its own personality, its own being. And then you have your own life, your family, and, you know, your personal assets. But if you put into your structure in ways that compromise that corporate veil, that compromise the separations, such as one bank account for everything, it makes it very difficult to now treat these as separate entities. So even though you have an LLC, it's not a fail-safe, if I could use that word, of protection. And even in that illustration, and I love that illustration because, you know, Travelers Insurance has the whole little red umbrella. The umbrella is just an umbrella. If you're going to dump something heavy on it, it still can collapse. And just think about a structure being that same way. You have to respect and understand what the structure does so you can make sure you're positioned correctly for full protection, and understand when you undermine the structure, you know, you poke the holes, now there's less integrity in that structure. So I know that sounds very technical, but, you know, we want to open this conversation. We want to make sure everyone understands this, because I think people think sometimes that checklist of what you need to do to get started is everybody does this checklist. You know, I need to get an LLC, check. I need to get an EIN, check. I need to, you know, do this. Now, it's a guideline for sure. And it's, as Ashley said, it's a advisable guideline, but you need to understand why you did those things as well. So when you have to do something different and you didn't see what happens between steps 4 and 5 on your checklist, you'll know how to act accordingly for what the steps you've done up to step 4 would be. All right, you guys, any questions? Now, again, the beauty of this is we have an attorney who has that benefit of having truckers experience. You know, I just had this conversation of where my underwriters are telling me, you don't need to say it like that. And I'm like, if I sat there and read this policy, I would not sell a single one. You know, people would be like, what are you talking about? It says that I would scare more people. And does it need to still be known? Yes. And I go through that. I'm not saying I sugarcoat it and make it like, oh, yeah, just get this. But it's that fine line, if you would, between sales and service of making sure people can digest the information that's out there and be able to move forward, that we're encouraging and showing you how to do this. And instead of people just saying, you know what, just take it. Just, I ain't doing that no more. Because we do have an industry. We do have Black and brown drivers out there that are looking for business owners that look like them, that will understand them, and that will have that empathy to help them grow their businesses. So I don't want anyone to leave this conversation today and saying, oh my God, that's a lot. I hope you feel encouraged in saying, wow, thank you for this information. Now I know. Now I know, because these are the things we always say, no one told us this. It was told here today. So please, let's ask your questions. And if we don't have here questions today, Ashley, what's the best way for them to contact you?
You can contact me via email.
The last slide, I guess. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Email, phone. You can text me. I should have put my Instagram and all my other information, but I didn't. But if you contact me, I'll reach back out to you. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this presentation, again, for your time. We posted the dispatcher contract training course, again, free is my favorite word. So make sure for September 11th and 12th that you look at the post, register for the training if you would like to get more information on this topic that, you know, whether or not we know, whether or not, sometimes I hate to say we care, because that's how people make me feel about insurance. They're just like, I just have to pay you. And it's just like, but it's there for protection. ultimately, you don't want to have to go into your own pocket and come up with $1 million. You want to be able to operate ahead of time before you make your first million, that you have $1 million secured for you. And that's what an insurance policy does. The same thing with the law. It's there to protect you, but we just need to make sure we understand how to use it, how to respect it. So as we are kind of winding up, any final questions, takeaways that you would like to express from the audience? Is there possible to post the link for the training here? Let me look it up. Did you email that to me first? I forgot.
Me?
Yeah, Ashley, did you email the link for your Facebook training?
No, but I could post it in the chat real quick.
All right, awesome. Thank you. All right, so the replay, yes, it's going to be available for sharing. We have the thank yous here in the chat, but we are closing out. I don't think there was any other questions, but we'll kind of hang out. I'll keep the room open. I am going to go ahead and stop the recording then at this time. All right, did it stop?